Hello! Hello everyone, how are you? It's so lovely to be here with you. My name is Jane Hutchin and I'm the journalist in residence with Stay Kind, and welcome to this Stay Kind conversation with Professor Paul Preisz, who is head of the emergency department at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney and also an associate professor with UNSW. Now, before I bring him to the stage, I just wanted to let you know a couple of housekeeping things. You can see in front of you probably some tabs. We have a chat tab and there's a Q&A tab. And on the chat tab, I'd love you to say hello. I mean, this conversation is about connection. It's really important for us to stay connected at times like this. So, feel free to say hello. Let me know where you're calling from and how you're feeling. And then later on, as we get towards 7:30, you can already see the Q&A tab, but please use that one to ask questions to Professor Preisz, and that's the tab you use if you want your question to be asked. And we will take it away very shortly. Just warning you, we're having a few gremlins in the system tonight, but just hang in there. Professor Preisz will reappear if he disappears, and we're so glad to have you here. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Professor Paul Preisz. Paul, good evening.
Good evening. Hello.
What kind of a day have you had? Has it been a kind day?
Look, generally it has been. It's been a long and kind day, but a kind day. I'm very privileged. The group I work with are very good, very kind to each other, and it makes a great deal of difference, I have to say.
You must have some very long days. I wonder what makes a good day in the emergency department.
I'm sorry, we're having technical problems there. Just one more time. We'll try that again.
Can you hear me okay now?
Now I can. I'm sorry. I don't know
Great.
What's going wrong with our technology today.
Well, I guess it's heavily on overload. I was wondering, what is it that makes it a good day in an emergency department?
Jane, you seem to just drop out at the crucial moment, but let me tell you about the emergency department today. We're in a state of ramping up because we're predicting more work, and we're still getting quite a lot of our ordinary business, but we're specifically noticing more and more COVID work. And it's not just us, of course, it's all the hospitals, but we've been getting a lot in the last few days, and all the modelling to see something. So
really,
it's going to be quite a thing.
We're strapping in for the ride, and we're so grateful that you're in the role that you're in. And we're getting some lovely messages from people from Jamboree, from Sydney, Docklands in Victoria, Hobart, Tasmania. How wonderful. So a very good evening to everybody who's joined us. Paul, you came from a country that I've actually always dreamed of visiting, just because you hear so little about it in geopolitical terms. Transylvania.
It's a strange place. It's not really even a country. I can't even tell you what it is. It's disputed territory, and it sits between Hungary and Romania, and was for a long time settled by Germans. So the mix of people there is fairly exotic. And to this day, it's still a little bit controversial about just who runs the place.
Right.
I've only been there once since we left when I was a small child, but I've only been back once, and it was not so long ago. And it is exactly as you imagine. It's misty and far away and incredibly unusual.
So I wonder, when you went back there recently, what was your perception? Because you were only 4 when you left with your big brother and your parents. How did it feel to step back there?
Look, it was a long term. I really wanted to go for a very long time, and I still regret now not going while my dad was still alive, because I think it would have been a great thing to have gone back with him and to have got a more personal sort of tour of the place. But I struggled to get the time, and it's very difficult. We had kids and all the usual things that everybody has, but we finally found a way of getting there. And the first thing I could say is it's really hard to get there. It's not the sort of place you can just book a ticket. We travelled from Budapest, which is not so far on a map, but There is no really easy, direct way. It's possibly because not everybody gets along in that part of the world. And the most direct thing I did, eventually I gave up on public transport. It was impossible. I actually got onto a website and found a very, very dodgy Russian limousine company who drove to Budapest and picked us up at the door and drove us into the hills of Transylvania. And I did think for a while that we may never be seen again, because it was a pretty sort of, it was a brave move. But as it turned out, they dropped us at exactly where we needed to be. And I think it would have taken probably 5 times as long if we tried any other way. But it was a gamble that paid off.
You said that you found unexpected kindness there. Can you tell us about that?
Look, the economic situation there is pretty tough. The transition from communism to a sort of totalitarian state to trying to get on par with the rest of Central Europe, let alone Western Europe, it's not really an easy process. And they've had a terrible sort of problem that I think a lot of countries in that situation have. The young people are leaving, and particularly the educated and the people who really should form the sort of new generation, and the entrepreneurs, the people who've got ideas, the talent. So the place was looking pretty sad and pretty tired, and everyone looked like they were doing it pretty tough. Now my language skills are a bit mixed. I speak some German reasonably well. I speak Hungarian pretty well. Romanian is very much like Latin, and I speak some. So my wife is, she's tough. She said, look, the whole time we're here, you're not speaking English. You can pick any other language, but no English. So I was very much being tested, and it was terrific how well people responded. I'm not sure that my vocabulary is wide enough to live there on a day-to-day basis, but most of the time people understood, and they were fantastic. They wanted us to visit their homes. They wanted us to eat with them, to drink with them. Pretty much everywhere we went in that small area, we ran into kindness. And there was no special reason for it. It was just the way the people were. And it was an amazing trip. It really was. I was astounded. It wasn't what I was expecting at all.
Did Australians show kindness to you and your family when you first came here at age 4?
I'm always grateful. We were so fortunate to have come to Australia. I mean, post-war Europe was a tough place, and there were a lot of options, and people went to many places all over the world, and it was sort of circuitous that we got to live in Australia, but it was fantastic. I mean, living in Australia in the 60s, there was work. We had no money when we arrived, but that was okay. We lived in a rented weatherboard house, fantastic neighbours, nice kids, great schools. I mean, it really was a not just a great place, great era, a great time. And to this day, I am grateful. I feel this great debt to Australia for sort of letting us in. And
how lovely.
I don't think that'll ever fade. I'm so happy to be here still.
Paul, you and your older brother, it's a long story, so we don't have to go into the whole story, but you ended up being in the same class, and you both ended up studying medicine. I believe he's in Western Sydney, and is that right? Western Sydney as opposed to Western Australia, and you're in the East.
Absolutely. Look, it was one of those things. We didn't speak English when we arrived, and we turned up at the local public school. We were very shy, quiet kids. We were very similar size, shape, colour, everything. So they plonked us together, and I like to say that we were sort of alphabetically doomed to be forever together. And we stayed pretty much together from that first day till the last day of medicine at Sydney University.
Wow!
And then we parted ways. He went one way and I went the other, but we actually ended up doing very similar work. So it was an interesting sort of path.
And what was it that made you both study medicine?
I just lost you there for a second, Jane. I'm not sure why that happens.
What was it that made you study medicine?
Yeah, look, I was one of those lucky kids who always knew what they wanted to do. And I wish I could analyse it and give you a good answer for this, but I was always interested, and my wife likes to say that people in health have a helper gene, and there's something about that kind of work that attracts them. And I see it all the time. I see it in the nurses and the other doctors and the physios and everyone in that place. They've got this sort of mutual underlying current that they want to be of use, and they want to be of use to other people. And that's a strong attraction. And then there's the sciencey bits of medicine, and uh, there's so much in medicine that most people will find their niche. And for me, I always knew I was going to do medicine, and I always knew what kind of medicine I was interested in. So uh, I was one of the lucky ones. I think it's a tough time when you're an adolescent teenager and you've got to decide what am I going to do for the rest of my life. And I was very, very lucky. I just knew.
I want to get on to the issue of COVID in a second, but you've been working in emergency medicine for 40 years now.
Yeah.
For you, what is the most challenging aspect of that job? You've told us that you have a helper gene, so you obviously enjoy that element of it.
Yeah.
What is the challenging element of it?
Look, there are very difficult technical aspects to medicine, there's no question, and the amount of knowledge that we have in the medical world is expanding enormously. So there's a great pressure, of course, to keep up and to know what you're doing, but there's also a great sort of, I feel very driven to try and, again, I like that phrase, be of use. And you see people at their most vulnerable, and honestly, it's a very difficult interaction for a lot of the patients that we have, because it's an emergency department, and there's a lot of stress involved. And for me, I think that combination of trying to do the right thing and trying to be sort of available to people, trying to give them the kind of reassurance that they need, give them the kind of human interaction that they need. I think that's a difficult challenge, because medicine is now very technical. There's a lot of different data to process to get things right. So you've got those two sides that get it right, the science bit, and then you've got the human side, which is almost as important. You've got to give people some warmth. You've got to give them some interaction, and I mean, that's something that many people just do naturally, but it's actually quite challenging to do both together.
Well, you'd have to admit that COVID is one of the biggest challenges you would have faced in your life, and most of us living would say the same thing, and that involves humans and that involves science. I wonder, when you first heard of this virus that was coming out of the Chinese city of Wuhan, did you immediately pay attention?
Well, we get a lot of interesting reports, and of course social media, and there's a network of things that many health people are on. So we were getting bits and pieces, and we often get things that sound interesting, quirky, and you don't quite get the significance. And look, even that word novel, in a lot of ways, novel is a word that has a positive association. It means something interesting, something different.
That's right, because it was called the novel coronavirus to begin with, wasn't it?
And in a lot of ways, well, that's what it is. It's novel in the sense that humans had never experienced it before. But in a lot of ways, that's a sort of unfortunate phrase, because it should have rung alarm bells. It should have been something where we thought, this could be catastrophic. This is something where our bodies had no way of knowing, we had no way of knowing the effect it would have on our bodies. We had no way of knowing how to diagnose, to treat, to understand this disease. So it was novel in many ways. And we really took a while to catch on to that. Now, there are clever people in public health who fully understood the implications of this right at the start. But to get through the medical community, and especially halfway around the world, to think this is going to sweep the planet, and to get some of the implications, I'm sure not a lot of people really picked that up in the early days. And it was really only when we started seeing, particularly some of the Italian footage that was being streamed live, that was incredible. And a lot of us had friends and folk we knew who worked there. And so just the
Which particular
of what was happening.
footage do you mean?
Some of the footage from Italian hospitals that were being overwhelmed, and that's a rare thing. They've got a great health system. They're a modern, sophisticated country with a terrific healthcare system. So to see that that could actually be overrun, it's like seeing a modern army easily defeated. You just don't think that could happen, but it did.
Paul, this is going to sound naive, but do you ever feel fearful? And do you ever feel fearful when you're confronted with a crisis like COVID?
Yeah, look, you should feel fearful. It is a dangerous, terrible business. People who work in my line of work are in the disaster business. In fact, it forms a significant sort of element of the training that we do. So to an extent, we're a bit prepared for it. I mean, we don't obviously take it lightly or downplay it, but disaster and mass casualty and catastrophes of all sorts are kind of in our line of work. So I guess we revert to what we learn, and we learn systems and processes. And I'm very fortunate. I work with a terrific group of people, and right at the outset, we had a very good structured way of getting together and saying, well, this is how we're going to respond. And we actually wrote a roadmap of where we thought this would go and how we would respond and what we would do. And, it was actually not too bad. It was pretty much reflected what happened, and our responses as we've stepped through them have kind of matched what's been required. I'm sure all the hospitals did that, and I know they did. And of course, at state level, the ministry also had their higher level planning. So one of the things that we do in situations of fear and crisis is we try to put structure around things. And I think that helps. That sort of allayed a lot of the fears. Communication, we talked a lot amongst ourselves, and structure. And I think that was actually really useful, important for us.
I want to ask you a bit about vaccine hesitancy, not in any political way, but we had, I suppose, a situation where there was evidence, but then a large part, I believe it's something like 1 in 5 Australians who are vaccine hesitant. From a scientific point of view, can you explain to us what does vaccine hesitancy come from? And has there always been this kind of, I suppose it's a type of doubt?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose we've moved from a model where it was very patriarchal. You went to the doctor and they gave you advice and you just did that. And now we're in an era where we have joint decision making, and people like to research. And unfortunately, there's a lot of avenues for unfiltered information. So to some extent, I mean, there's a broad range of reasons why people have vaccine hesitancy. So I can't sort of say this represents everybody, but certainly a significant part of it is just knowing what's true. And the idea that you can go on the internet and to some extent the algorithms will guide you to what you already believe. And there are significant issues with the kinds of information that people get. And clearly decision making isn't easy. We get all this information, we weigh it up and we have to make decisions. And different people weight things in different ways. So, I mean, for doctors and for people in the medical world, we're very trained in how to assimilate information and what we would give weight to, and that's not the same for everybody. So there is a significant element of that, and you can add to that all sorts of other reasons. Then certainly there's a spectrum of folk out there. Are we back?
I'm still here. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Professor
I can.
Preisz, I wonder, I'm interested in how COVID is going to change our community. It's, in a sense, redefining how we commit to each other as a community. I wonder, do you think COVID is going to make us think more about that word community? And is it even going to redefine that word kindness?
Look, I hope so. And I do see this. There is a thing, communitarianism, where we look at the way we relate to each other, and it actually matters. We always had this conflict between individual autonomy and the greater good, if you like, how we all fit together. And it's interesting how different countries and different societies put different weight on this. But Australians are remarkably community-minded, really. And, you know, you do see examples where you think, gee, I wish they hadn't done that. But the vast majority of people are pretty good. They want to do the right thing. Now, there's lots of challenges, you know, it's not easy, but I think it's a fantastic reflection on Australian society that most people really do want to do the right thing. And that's what makes it such a dramatic thing when we see examples where they don't do the right thing, because most people do. And they don't do that because there are elements of, there are legislative things and there are sort of directives from government and so on. But the underlying current is that most people are pretty good. Most people want to do that, and they see the value in it. And I think you're right. It does emphasise this idea of kindness, because kindness is a complicated thing. It's not just sympathy and being nice to people. There's an element of respect in kindness and a sort of mutual interaction, respect. And I see that a lot. I think that's very admirable.
That's a really interesting idea. So it's almost about a little bit of sacrifice, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's been said a lot, that if you just give and it doesn't cost you anything, then that's okay. But if it costs you something, if it costs you a little bit of freedom, or if it costs you something that you want to do and can't, that actually matters. That there's something in that. And you know, you do see the vast majority of people are willing to do that. They can see the good.
Professor Preisz, I want you to take your professorial and your emergency department hat off for a minute. And as a human being, as we all are, can you tell us when, for you, it is most challenging for you to remain kind? We've had discussions in the past about, you know, for me personally, I can tend to fly off the handle, particularly in traffic. I wonder, you know, what about you? When are you challenged to be kind, to stay kind?
Yeah, look, again, I've been in such an unusual situation for such a long time, in stressful environments and so on, that to me, some of the more stressful things for most folk aren't stressful. So we live in situations of great stress, and they're every day. I personally have a thing about civility, and sometimes that's not universal. And civility really matters. It matters for lots of reasons. Apart from anything else, if you're working in difficult circumstances, then civility is important for maintaining control. And it actually, incivility makes people less cognitively able. So I really have a problem when I see incivility in the workplace, but in general. So that to me is very difficult. And of course, you know, there are a wide range of personalities out there, and under duress, you'll see things that you don't like to see. So I like everybody, I suppose, have trouble dealing with that when it comes out. Effectively, it was a bit of a crucible for us when you get this sort of concentrated, distressing thing, and you will, under those situations, see incivility. And that's a real thing for me, because I've got to maintain cohesion in a group and to function properly. And on a human level, for some reason, it really irks me. And I find that a sort of strange thing. But incivility in general, I think, is an issue for me, which is an odd thing to pick, I know, but it is.
It's wonderful, and I really appreciate you talking to us about that. I've had the I've spent a bit of time in emergency rooms this year because of my my aging mum, and I actually love sitting in emergency departments. It's like you're seeing this slice of humanity all around you, and even when the curtains are drawn, you can hear those conversations. And for me, one of the best things about an emergency department is the clarity that I hear from the doctors and nurses. And again, I know there is practice, but I came to this conclusion that clarity, so being very precise about what you're saying to people and being clear in what you're saying to people, is one of the deepest forms of kindness you can find. Is clarity in your training as well?
It should be. Well, it should be as much as we can, because I think it's an easy thing to retreat into jargon and technical things, but it's really important to try and avoid that. And it's so appreciated. I think the challenge is in making things understandable, but not dumbing them down. And you're quite right. Clarity really matters. It's one of those human interaction things. It's why we don't have robots treating this, because it wouldn't be quite the same. And I think there's actually quite a lot of emphasis now on communication skills in the universities and in the postgraduate training. We actually have one of the ways we assess how our staff perform is in how they communicate, how they react with not just their colleagues, but with patients and their families.
We're coming up to about the 5-minute mark, and I'm going to ask people to submit their questions in the Q&A tab in a few minutes. I have one or two really important questions for you before we go to audience questions. Since November 2020, can you still hear me? How are we going?
Sorry, I've just lost you for 1 sec there, Jane.
No problem. Can you hear me now?
I can now, yes.
Great. I really wanted to talk about Panda, not the black and white thing we find in a zoo, but St. Vincent's first psychiatric alcohol and non-prescription drug assessment unit. Panda, which you have spent most of your career lobbying for, and this is now part of St. Vincent's emergency department, a $17 million facility. Why were you such a strong advocate for this facility?
Look, that goes back a very, very long way. This is a group of the most unloved. These folk are struggling. They've got many complex issues, and how to help people who've got alcohol and mental health problems and poverty and social isolation and medical illness, it's actually really difficult, and we found no ideal way of doing that. We literally had to invent it. And there was 10 years of development, of research, of looking through the best ways to do this. And in many other aspects of medicine, you can find a model, something you can adapt, something you can work with. This is new. This is a group that hadn't really got what they needed for a very long time. For example, there are specialists in every field, pretty much. But there's no one whose specialty is to pull all those things together, to find a sort of holistic way of managing a patient with so many different problems. And they're not easy patients. I mean, many of them have a lot of behavioural issues, and we had to work around the design to really get this right. And there was a significant element of convincing folk that this was something that we needed, and there was quite a bit of fundraising and other exercises we went through. But 10 years in the making, and we launched our Panda last year, and it's a great moment because it was immediately full. And it's been pretty much full most of the time since, because the demand was always there. And one of the best things that I couldn't have even hoped for was the positivity I get back from these patients, the cards, the letters, the things that really stand out are when they say, look, I got treated like a person. I got a meal, I got a proper bed, I got proper help. I wasn't dismissed. I wasn't put aside as being too hard or didn't fit neatly into this basket or that basket. And a lot of people in that situation have been through the works. They've been in and out of hospital a bit, and they've had some experiences that aren't as good as that. So this is something new. It's been incredibly well received by the other staff here. We've had no trouble getting people to volunteer to work there, and the kind of patient we've been putting through there, we really had never been able to manage that group properly before. So I am so happy with this unit. It's been a fantastic experience.
So tell me a little bit more about, you say this group. I know that for some people they might not know St Vincent's is situated in a very interesting inner city part of Sydney, and I guess there is a sizable population of homeless people and people who perhaps indulge in drugs and maybe alcohol. So you were finding that there were a lot of people coming to the emergency department?
Yeah, we are the sort of port of last resort for many folk, and we are in an interesting geographical spot. We're quite close to some of the most expensive real estate in the country, and we're quite close to some of the most uh, difficult areas in the country as well. So we get everything here. We get every part of humanity here, and we've always had it's a obviously the Sisters of Charity's got a long tradition of doing work for the vulnerable, and that's pretty real. I think all the hospitals obviously have they want to do this sort of work, but this is a very strong tradition here at St Vincent's, and you know the kind of work we're doing in Panda would never have happened if our executive hadn't said this is right in line with what we want to do. It's not glamorous. It doesn't sell well. It doesn't win us any favours with politicians or with folk who've got donors with checkbooks. Really, but it's important, and I think that's one of the things that makes this such a great place is that it's valued. And I I got a very nice had a very nice conversation with one of our junior doctors who just finished working in the Panda. He said, "Look, it didn't just make me a better doctor; it made me a better person." And I
Wow,
thought that was just such a great thing to say about working in a place like that.
that's beautiful.
So that's my
We
Panda, and I love it.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about that. We have a few minutes left on our event, and I was wondering whether anyone out there has questions, particularly about the situation we're in. We have one of the world's great emergency department experts with us. If you have any questions about COVID or what's happening in Australia, this is a great time to put your questions in the Q&A tab to Professor Preisz. I've got a question. How long do you think we will be living with COVID for?
Well, I think the disease has broken into the human species and will be here for an indefinite future. There's only been really two examples of diseases that have been eradicated in a position where we can look to vaccinate, and hopefully that will become something that's more universal. And it won't be the sort of way people are actually expressing gratitude, because for many people, they come to hospital, they have expectations. We get a lot of positive things. I think you might end up looking back on this and saying, well, that was tough work, but if nothing else, we spent a lot of time together, and your kids will think of you differently. They've had that time with you. So chin up, going to be a tough couple of months, I think, but maybe
Preisz. We so appreciate your time today. I'm getting lots of beautiful comments on the chat room to, you know, the fact that you're highlighting the importance of kindness in this most difficult of times. We really appreciate you coming. I know you're